In the grim dark future of the 41st millennium, there is only debt, new kids, meta changes, shiny new FOMO boxes. You can only resist for so long. And that is why we are here today with the man himself, Fabius Bile. Let's put him together and paint him in a suitably grimdark style to suit the universe of Warhammer 401k. Hey guys, Chris here from The Road Painter. Today I'm going to be taking you through the build and painting process of my Grimdark Fabius Bile for my Slaanesh Chaos Space Marines Warband. There's some things that you'll notice that really stand out different to what the Heavy Metal team have done on the traditional box art for Fabius. 1. The flesh cloak is going to look like actual flayed skin that is bloody and bruised and rotting. 2, because I want the flesh cloak to be a highlight, I'm choosing to go all black armor panels. This also saves a lot of time painting. And there is another bonus to this. I can use this in a Chaos Undivided army and then also in my Slaanesh Warband, which has a pink and black armor scheme. Don't get me wrong, the Heavy Metals box art is absolutely amazing. It's too pretty, too clean for Chaos Space Marines, for Fabius, and just doesn't meet what my expectations are for a grimdark 41st millennium. So let's see how I would depict Fabius in this style. Step 1, you're going to do a Zenithal Prime. I used a rattle can, so you can achieve it that way. And then we're going to base coat all the parts that we want to be black, namely all the armor panels and any metallic bits. The ones that are going to be gold or silver in black. Next, we base coat the Flayed skin cloak with about 50-50 mix of Kislev flesh and Army Painter Grey Castle. The reason I did this mix is because I wanted it to be a bit darker and warmer on the bottom layer of this cloak to show that it's sort of like warmer and slightly less dead skin. And as we build it up, it's going to be lighter, paler, grayer, and more dead looking, like there's rotting flesh on the top surface. I then also tidied up some little black bits like the corset strings, which I missed, and this was really tricky for me. Then using AK German Grey or any dark grey blue or blue black paint, and we're going to dry brush pretty liberally over all the black parts. I also did the metallic parts that are going to be silver, like his servo arm things, but that wasn't really necessary because I'm going to cover most of it in silver, as you'll see. Then I went in with a sort of mid-grey and then a light grey to do 2 more slightly smaller and lighter passes of dry brushing over all the black parts. Now, for something a little bit experimental, because I want this to be grimdark and battle damaged and rough, I'm choosing to be lazy and just sponge on the silver, not actually covering on 100% of the area that I want to be metallic. Covering probably like 80 to 90% of any one area and leaving texture and like a bit of black showing through. Then also going in with a brush to get any hard to reach areas and doing a little bit of like chipping towards the edges of armor panels in the backpack to show bare steel or iron showing through. If you also struggle with getting a good coverage of the metallic paints like me, then give dry brushing, sponging or stippling a go and get some cool effects with minimal effort. Here are the trio of shades that I used on the Flayed skin cloak. I'll start with Carroburg Crimson, just tracing pretty roughly throughout all the seams and stitches, letting it spill over if it wants to, and then I use a combination of all 3 of the shades to just randomly splotch and splatter over about 90% of the Flayed skin area. Next, we're going to start building up some easy layers and highlights, as well as the appearance of dead rotting skin with Grey Castle once again and Great Hall Grey. I'm coming at it really rough and random with a stippling motion, trying to cover 70% of all the upwards facing edges and sort of like the outer edges of the cloak. Using a pretty opaque paint initially because Army Painter tends to be a bit thinner. I just use it straight out the bottle without thinning it. But I then did come over it again, especially where it sort of met the shaded areas or the transitions and did it a little bit thinner, a bit more like a glaze. I figured the exposed purple, blue and red gives the effect of like bruised and mottled skin, but I don't want it to stick out like dog's balls either, hence doing a bit of glazing to cover it over a little bit and blend it all together. And try to just cover about 50% of the Grey Castle with your Great Hall Grey to highlight it. Wasn't 100% sold on this look yet, so I thinned down some Riken Flesh Shade 50-50 and just carefully put it over the parts that we have just painted. This just darkened down and added a little bit of a different tone to the layers, and then I went in with the exact same 2 Army Painter paints and just covered even less of the area. Now, I hope you'll agree that there's more tonal variation and it makes the highlights pop more and gives a little bit more contrast, because it was looking a little bit too pale and bright for my liking before, so I think this gives it a little bit more depth. Then I put a bit of Caribou Crimson around the outside edges, especially where there was cuts and tears, and then a little bit of our highlight color on the inside of one of those edges to show the light catching these rips. And here's a little montage of me painting all the gold details with the Runelord brass, their skulls, their little bits of trim and rings and whatnot, and there's no stippling here whatsoever, just normal brushstrokes. Now, there were some silver parts that I couldn't get in with a sponge to stipple accurately, so I used a brush to just apply a little bit of paint on the upwards facing edges before totally covering every part of metallic on Fabius with a 50-50 mix of Rattling Grime contrast and medium. And I know what you're thinking, why do all that painting if you're just going to cover it all up? Well, you will still see some of those highlights pop through, they're just dulled down a little bit, and this means we can go back in with the same colors and just do an even smaller highlight to make them really pop. And this way, also don't need an additional gold or silver color that is even brighter than the one I had before, because I'm just dulling down the main color and then reapplying that same color as a highlight. I did the skin with Rakarth Flesh, which to be honest is one of my least favorite paints of all time. Like, I actually really love the color and the finish, but it basically separates into lots of different colored pigments as soon as you set it on your wet palette, so it's kind of annoying. And I just covered the whole face with this and then went in with Rakarth Flesh Shade and picked out the recesses and some edges that I wanted to be more shaded. Then, using Rakarth Flesh again, adding in a little bit of white, we pick out all the upwards facing edges and all the sticky outy bits to highlight. Think about the brow, the crease lines, the cheekbones, and add a little bit more white so it's not quite pure white, and come in just doing a little bit of a smaller area again to bring up those highlights even more. Now, I used a bit of a glaze of Rakarth Flesh with just the tiniest bit of white to blend together the highlights to the shaded areas that hadn't been touched yet. And then on the head, I went a little bit further with this and did extra layers to make it more opaque, and then added a little bit more white again to bring it up to that real bright highlight. Guess old Fabius hasn't heard about Ashley and Martin, poor bastard. Then very carefully dabbed a little bit of Drakenhof Nightshade around the eye sockets, and I actually forgot to do the eyes completely, so oh well. Now, onto the brains. I actually nearly missed this detail completely and thought it was just part of the armor, but glad I didn't miss it because this actually looks really cool. We go Screamer Pink as the base, Pink Horror as the second layer, and then add in a bit of Off-White for the third, which is almost just a dot highlight. And then we use this little bit of the glaze of Pink Horror to dull it all down and bring it together to unify it as one. Then we went back in with pure Off-White and did the tiniest dot highlights to make it really glisten, because remember, it's a wet organic thing after all. Pretty much like the box art, I kept the head trophy basically white, putting a bit of Celestra Grey on there and some Drakenhof Nightshade just to make it look a little bit more interesting. I really hate to think what Fabius does with this thing after dark. Ugh. And use Celestra Grey once again to cover all the cloth parts that form his surgeon's toolkit thing, I guess. And then onto the really tricky part. So I kind of winged a lot of this and used the box art as a bit of a reference, of course, but doing the vials was a little bit experimental, a little bit haphazard. So we're going in with the Temple Guard blue on the bits that I wanted to be the lightest, and then using a dark green blue to form the shadows, and basically just wet blending and glazing over transitions with a mixture of both colors. I honestly can't tell you exactly how I did it. The vials up top were kind of easier in a way, kind of not. To show that they're not full, I did differing amounts of dark blue up the top to show where the vial is empty, and it gets progressively lighter down the bottom, finishing with a bit of white on the bottom, and then stippling in the light blue again over some of the white to make it blend in and look a bit more seamless. Then, using a really thin brush and a lot of patience, holding my breath, I did some really dodgy, shaky white lines to simulate the reflections that they did on the box art. But don't stress, if you stuff them up like I did, you can come back in with your same blue color or the dark blue shade and dab over the lines just around the edges to tidy up the white line and to re-establish those shadows. Believe me, this is not how it looked after just the first attempt. For the red bits, I kind of lost patience by now. I did a very similar technique using Mephiston Red and a little bit of Wild Rider Red to form the transition and the highlight. And at the top, I just got really lazy and used Caribou Crimson Shade over the white to stain the top to make it look like a bit of a darker color where the vial was meant to be empty. You know, it didn't end up too badly, but anyway, here's me trying to neaten up the edge of the red where it goes into the Caribou Crimson, using the red and the whites respectively to make that line a little bit straighter and more conforming. Here we go with the shade and re-establishing the line, putting in the reflections, and yeah, you get the picture. When you're doing this sort of stuff, just make sure you got your elbows and or hands supported on the table or something, and your hands or fingers touching, and hold your damn breath. I wasn't joking about that. Hold your breath while you're doing these fine details, because it helps. But it does get easier from here. We use a dry brush to stipple on some Rhinox hide over the edges of the cloak and his feet to show where dirt's collecting, and also using a brush to gently apply some around the edges of the armor where I'd put some chipping before to simulate dirt, grime and rust as well. And for the basing, of course, we dry brush on some Eshin Grey, then some Celestial Grey, mainly focusing on the edges where the light would catch them most, and slap a good amount of Agrex Earthshade over everything because it makes everything better, doesn't it? And if you want, you can reapply some highlights with dry brush once again, but I don't think it needs it. And I'm going to stipple on a bit of silver over that piece of corrugated iron that you can see down there by his feet. And that's pretty much it. We finish off with a good old rim job, which would probably please Fabius Bile quite a lot. And let's have a look at how he turned out. There you have it, my Grimdark Fabius Bile. I think he turned out pretty dope, but I definitely do think in hindsight I could add some blood effects and maybe even something like an oil wash to make it look more dirty and grimdark. Let me know your thoughts. If you love this video, let me know by subscribing, leaving a like and a comment. I'd love to know what you think of this one and if you're going to give it a try yourself. See you guys.